In this video, we will be looking at inflation, what it is, what causes it, what it does, the morality of inflation, and possible reasons government wants a monetary policy that pursues some inflation. The purpose of this video, like the video on money, is to provide fundamental concepts and principles that are true, that are derived from or consistent with those found in Scripture, so that you have an appropriate framework with which to discern various policies and ideas. Before we focus specifically on inflation, it is important that people have a good understanding of money. A good understanding of money is necessary to pursue and achieve a monetary system and monetary policy that is just. To understand inflation, one must know what money is. So if you haven't watched the 10-minute video on money, I recommend doing that first. In that video, the characteristics effective money must have was briefly discussed. We'll summarize the three most important. They are divisibility, a store of value, and scarcity. First, money must be divisible. Can you imagine if cattle were money? Yeah, I'd like to buy a dozen apples, please. Sure, that'll be 1/10 of a cow. Second, money must be able to store value. What if money were chickens? Hey, why do you have so many chickens? Oh, I'm just saving up to buy a house. How's that working out for you? Not too well. I can't earn chickens fast enough. They keep dying, and nobody wants to trade for dead chickens. Third, money must be scarce. It is this feature that is at the crux of the inflation lesson. Recall that money is a medium of exchange, and that money was developed through voluntary exchanges. People in a barter economy, over time, learned that certain goods were more tradable than others. Thus, people began to trade for those easily tradable goods to serve them as a medium of exchange, as money, which allowed for an increasingly specialized and prosperous economy. Civilizations across the planet eventually used gold and silver as their general medium of exchange. That's because these two items satisfy the features mentioned earlier that money must have for it to be effective. It is also important to understand that money is an IOU. In a free society, one earns money by first producing, or working to help with the production of some good or service. In exchange for your product or labor services, you receive money from someone who values your product or labor services. That money represents the fact that you served others. You helped society, so to speak. You made or did something for others. You contributed. For your contribution, you get to exchange your money for something someone else made available. Your money is a claim on other goods or services that are available. Think of a barter economy. You cannot trade your good, let's say shoes, for another person's hats unless you first produce shoes. Money does not change this. All goods or services are ultimately traded for other goods or services. Money only makes it indirect. If I sell my old car for $5,000 and then spend my $5,000 on a motorcycle, I essentially traded my car for a motorcycle. Realizing that goods are ultimately traded for other goods helps us to learn about the nature of exchange, that it is a win-win. Exchanges or trades do not occur unless the parties involved perceive that they are receiving something more valuable than they are giving. After learning this, one might ask about paper money. Where did that come from, or why did that develop? Let's explain this with a story. You begin to get tired of storing hundreds of units of gold in your home where it could be stolen. You are also tired of carrying the gold around when you need to make an exchange. It's heavy and cumbersome. Wanting to keep your gold safe, you deposit it in a warehouse. The warehouse owner gives you receipts. Your neighbor, the butcher, places 100 units of his own gold in the same warehouse and receives receipts as well. The butcher then wishes to buy a loaf of bread from you, the baker, at a cost of 1 unit of gold. He could walk to the warehouse, ask for a unit of gold, return to you, and pay as 1 unit of gold. This, of course, is an extremely inefficient way of doing business. Another method would be through the exchange of receipts. A receipt for 1 piece of gold for 1 loaf of bread would take place within the bakery without wasteful walking back and forth. This was how paper money began in the marketplace. Point of note, this paper money was based on the gold standard. But as you may know, we are no longer on the gold standard. In 1933, FDR took the nation off the gold standard, and in 1971, Nixon took the world off the gold standard. The U.S. and the world now have an entirely fiat money system. How does this apply to inflation? Well, to begin, let's define inflation. Most textbooks define inflation as a general rise in prices. That is an inadequate definition. Rather, inflation is an increase in the money supply. The general rise in prices is an effect of inflation, not inflation in and of itself. A general rise in prices, after all, cannot occur unless the total money supply increases. Think about it. If the money supply remains stable and the price of item A goes up, then the price for another item or items must fall, as there is less money now available to purchase them. And let's make clear, money is an economic good, which means we can apply economic laws to money and analyze it just like any other good. The law of demand and the law of supply, for example, impacts money as it does television sets. All things equal, suddenly doubling the supply of TVs will cause the price for TVs to fall. All things equal, increasing the supply of money will cause the value of each individual dollar to fall, weakening its buying power, thus causing a general rise in prices. So keep in mind, inflation is an increase in the supply of money. The general rise of prices is an effect. So what causes inflation? There are two main factors responsible for an increase in the money supply. First, fractional reserve banking. In this system, money is loaned into existence. How that occurs is good to know, but outside the scope of this video. If interested in learning about this, see the links provided in the description. Second factor that causes inflation of increasing the money supply is the Federal Reserve, which is a public-private hybrid, so to speak. The Federal Reserve, through the Federal Open Market Committee, has the legal authority to use its powers to arbitrarily change the money supply. For more information on this, also see the links in the description. Now that we know what inflation is and what causes inflation, what does inflation do? What are its effects? Inflating the money supply causes the value of each unit of money to go down. When the value of money goes down, prices for goods and services go up, which means you need more of it to buy what you want. Let's say an economy only has 10 loaves of bread and 10 units of money. 1 unit of money purchases 1 loaf of bread. Then let's say the money supply is doubled, is inflated to 20 units. Is the economy twice as wealthy? No. Instead, the value of money dropped. Now each loaf of bread will cost 2 units instead of 1. Wealth did not increase because you still have 10 loaves of bread. Thus, inflation causes almost all prices to go up and the value of money to go down. That is why people worry about it. Now, not all prices reflect inflation to the same extent or at the same time. Recall the scenario we did in the money video, where a classroom of students represented the world economy. Each student had $1 million, and all of the money between them represented the wealth, food, homes, capital goods, etc., in our economy. I had them all add a zero to their $1 million that all now had $10 million apiece. This increase in the money supply, however, did not magically increase the food, homes, capital goods, etc., in our economy. We learned from this exercise that money is not wealth. Simply increasing it does not make an economy grow. In that scenario, each student received the same amount of the inflated money at the same time. In real life, inflation doesn't happen that evenly, which brings us to another effect of inflation. A few people get the money first, generally privileged bankers. So I tell the students in one row that they are the privileged bankers. And then I tell only those students to add another zero to their bank balances. I ask again, is there now more consumable or producing stuff in our economy? Of course, the answer is still no. Society as a whole isn't wealthier. But are the people in the privileged banker row wealthier because of the new money? There's no denying it. They now have 10 times more money than anyone else does, as well as 10 times more than they themselves would have had otherwise. But being wealthier means they can get more actual stuff. And if, as we've established, the new money did not create more total stuff, they can't get more stuff unless other people get less stuff. This government inflation, therefore, is necessarily a redistribution of wealth. it is a zero-sum game. It is a win-lose situation. Unlike events in a free market, which are win-win, a loser is effectively taxed by an act of the government for the sake of the winner. Not only does inflation reallocate wealth from those who earned it to those who didn't, it also artificially lowers interest rates and reallocates resources, changing the structure of production. This causes what is known as the business cycle, the periodic booms and busts of the economy. To explain, in a free market economy, interest rates help coordinate time preferences between consumers and producers. This signal, interest rates, serves as a vital role as it creates incentives for businesses to either invest in riskier, long-term projects or safer, shorter-term projects. When the interest rate, the price for borrowing money, is high, it indicates that consumers are spending their money rather than saving it, so the supply of money is low relative to demand for that money. A high interest rate also means it is expensive to borrow money, so businesses invest in short-term projects. If consumers begin to save and the money supplied in banks increases, then interest rates begin to go down. These lower interest rates mean that consumers are choosing not to consume, meaning they are choosing not to use resources, making them available for others. Low interest rates incentivize businesses to borrow for long-term projects. Because people are saving more, the needed resources will be available at profitable prices. However, when the Federal Reserve adopts a loose monetary policy, meaning they begin to increase the money supply by creating it out of basically thin air, more money is placed into banks. But this increase in money is not the result of people saving more. And because of this increase in money, interest rates drop, incentivizing businesses to borrow for long-term projects. And this is what creates a temporary boom. This lower interest rate, however, is a false signal. People are not saving more. That means both consumers and producers are competing for the same scarce resources, bidding prices up to levels that will make the longer-term projects unprofitable. Furthermore, since people are not saving more, there will not be enough resources to sustain these extra long-term projects dependent on the Fed's new money. As a result, a bust is inevitable. What I just explained to you is called the Austrian business cycle. I will provide links in the description if you're curious to learn more about it. Another effect of inflation is that when the value of money begins to fall, people start spending. Instead of waiting a couple of years to purchase certain items, people, worried that prices may climb too fast and the value of their money will be worth less in the near future, begin to save less and spend more. This has several negative effects. First, less savings means less surplus capital. With less surplus capital, businesses, entrepreneurs, are able to borrow less capital, financial capital, which they use to purchase or improve machinery, tools, equipment, things that help to improve productivity. That means there will be less production, and with less production, there's less wealth being created, and standards of living do not increase as quickly as they could have. Or, depending on the level of inflation, standards of living stagnate or even drop because there's so little savings available for them to borrow. Second, if the inflation is too high, then the increase in spending serves to push prices even higher, which encourages more people to spend their money even sooner, and eventually you have what is called hyperinflation. And you can read about the effects of hyperinflation by just looking at several events in history. Some that come to mind quickly are post-World War I Germany, Zimbabwe, and currently Venezuela. Those are places where you can get pretty good descriptions of what hyperinflation does to an economy. Keep in mind that when these prices for food and clothing and other things are increasing, it doesn't mean that the value of those things are increasing. It simply means that the value of money is just going down. So those are some of the effects of inflation. There's a whole lot more, but let's look at inflation from more of a practical or pragmatic perspective. Can inflation be good for some people? And can inflation be bad in specific ways for others?